Well, here's another attempt for me to provide you with a way of dealing with the class material through a screencast. This is a lecture that I'm not going to have time to get to in class, and some of it should be review for you if you're up on the reading. So you can see the title here is The End of the Revolution and the Beginning of the New Nation. And essentially what I want to try to do is get to that time period when the Declaration of Independence is created, and then through the creation of the new government, Articles of Confederation, and then just before the Constitution is ratified. You'll find within the Prezi several different videos that I've put in. You're welcome to view those on your own if you like. Some of them I'll skip over while I'm doing the screencast, but I will be sure to put a copy of the Prezi on my website so you can look at it as you want to and you have time. Now, where we are with the history of things here, it's basically 1774, and if you remember from the timeline of events, the British have instituted a number of different acts here. Specifically, at this point, is the coercive acts, and the main location for those is Boston. But many of the other colonists were aware of what was going on, and this is where we start to see some sort of unity developed between the colonists. In the fall of 1774, the colonists get together in Philadelphia, and they meet in what becomes known as the First Continental Congress. And at the Continental Congress is really focused on the growing oppression of England and the attempts to try to find some way to deal with the oppression, whether it's the inability for colonists to be able to move out to the Western territories, or, of course, the various acts, Stamp Act, Coercive Acts, Intolerable Acts, and the Prohibitory Acts. Something definitely needs to be done. Now, this next bit here is just a little video introduction, and it's kind of the History Channel's rock music video style, but it's still an interesting way of taking a look at it. So I will click on that one and give you a chance to watch that.
Tensions escalate far beyond Boston. Settlers are pushing west. Many have their eyes set on new land west of the Appalachians. But to protect Native American lands, England has banned settlements along a boundary called the Proclamation Line. Hundreds are evicted from their homes on the frontier. September 5th, 1774.
We want liberty.
Incensed at the British actions, 56 delegates from across the colonies gather at the First Continental Congress in Philadelphia. It's the first step on the road to American democracy. Among them are John Adams, Patrick Henry, and a gentleman landowner from Virginia named George Washington.
At a time when our lordly masters in Great Britain will be satisfied with nothing less than the deprivation of American freedom, it seems highly necessary that something should be done to maintain liberty.
Across New England, people prepare to defend themselves. Smuggled arms are collected and stashed in secret hideaways. But while many expect conflict, most delegates in Philadelphia want peace with Britain.
A military action would make a wound that would never be healed.
Let's go. Come on.
The First Continental Congress resolves that a British attack on any one colony will be regarded as an attack on all of them.
Let's go. You need that right in front.
What emerges at Philadelphia is solidarity.
The distinctions between Virginians, Pennsylvanians, New Englanders, and New Yorkers are no more.
In addition to the solidarity that was expressed here at the First Continental Congress, we also see that these individuals pass resolutions condemning the British taxes as well as administrative decrees. And so this is a very vocal and clear message from the Continental Congress that they oppose the actions of the Crown and Parliament passage of the laws for the colony. Interestingly enough, Benjamin Franklin is at this meeting, and we see one of the first efforts here to create a national government. He brings this up. It's discussed briefly and some debate on it, but ultimately it's not going to come to be until much later here in the time. All right, so what actually did they end up doing then? If we look at the outcomes of the Continental Congress, many of them are more symbolic than anything else. As it was mentioned in the video that you just saw there, the solidarity, it's very much a part of it, but no national government is ultimately formed. What they did, though, is they did adopt the Declaration of American Rights. Now, don't confuse this with the Declaration of Independence. But at the heart of this is that the Continental Congress asserts home rule, the fact that the colonies are responsible for government, for taxation, for control within the colonies, separate from Parliament. So it's not a declaration of independence in this sense, but basically it's an effort by the colonists to have control over their own destinies as Englishmen. The last aspect of this here is the efforts to try to have all the colonists follow along with the agreement to ban trade with Britain. Many of the colonists were benefiting from smuggling and other efforts outside of the law, but there were also groups who refused to follow the guidelines or the prescriptions set forth by the Continental Congress, and they continued to trade with Great Britain. So as a result of this, the Congress forms what are known as these committees of observation, and these you'll find these in every town and in every county. And the focus of these is to provide, one, a way to make sure that people are not trying to get around the boycotts on the English goods. And secondly, these committees provide a basis for statewide conventions. And so this is a way for the states to have greater control related to that idea of home rule. And then probably the most significant, just because it sets up what's going to come as a result of the Second Continental Congress, the members of the First Continental Congress, they appoint these delegates that are going to be involved with further efforts to try to create some sort of government within the colonies. But within about a year or so, it became clear to the leaders within the colonies that there was an effort needed to meet again, and this is where we have the Second Continental Congress. And by the time these folks meet in 1775, war had truly broken out between Great Britain and the colonies. Now, at this convention, there was an effort to try to focus more on creation of a national government, specifically as it relates to trying to have a war against Great Britain and having some sort of organized, structured way of dealing with that threat. Now, interestingly enough, although that was the main focus of what the Continental Congress was working on during their second meeting, they really had no legal authority to conduct a war. It was clear, though, that the colonies and the patriots really required some sort of coordination. And so their first instruction during the meeting was to get those state assemblies organized in a Republican fashion. You see the beginnings of the state governments forming as a result of the work of the Continental Congress. Additionally, they were using these colonial governments for states to develop their own constitution. This is going to become important, of course, the debate about the Constitution of the United States comes into play. Now, the war had truly broken out between the colonists and Great Britain. There were still efforts by individuals at the Second Continental Congress to try to reconcile with the king. We've used the term mother country when we talked about mercantilism, and that's a good way to continue to think about this. The colonists thinking themselves having a contract with the king, and just like a wayward son or daughter may want to patch things back up after a long argument or to fight with the parents at home, the colonists still saw as an opportunity here to maintain their connection. Now, not everybody agreed with this, but the Second Continental Congress established what was known as the Olive Branch Petition. And, of course, an olive branch is a sign of peace. And it was an effort, the last, to try to get to the king, to realize that the colonists were unhappy as Englishmen. But the whole language of the Continental, or of the Olive Branch Petition is of beseeching. It's one of trying to get the king to see the ways of the colonists in a respectful and proper manner. There's a link here to the actual document if you want to read a little bit more about it, and you can see the language that those folks used. As I mentioned, not everyone at the Congress was excited about reconciliation, and many of them wanted independence, and they start to use the rhetoric that we see most clearly expressed in Common Sense. And so Thomas Paine, of course, wrote Common Sense, and he really presented it in such a way that the average person could understand it. So many of the members of the Continental Congress, of course, were lawyers, very learned individuals, and not necessarily in tune with the common man. Well, Thomas Paine, fairly humble individual as far as his upbringing, was able to capture the ideas and express those in printed form. And at the heart of it, of course, is that the colonists, it is for their own well-being and benefit, common sense for them to separate from England.
The sun never shined on a cause of greater worth. 'Tis not the concern of a day, a year, or an age. Posterity will be affected, even to the end of time.
The writer of those words was an Englishman who had immigrated to the New World only a few months before the clash at Lexington and Concord. He was self-educated and penniless. At age 38, Thomas Paine had been a tutor, tobacconist, grocer, and corset maker, and he had failed at everything except troublemaking.
While he was in London, he enjoyed taking on everyone as a kind of 18th century Socrates. He was in the marketplace arguing with everybody. He became a tax collector, was fired from his job when he was caught handing out petitions to members of Parliament asking for higher pay for the tax collectors.
In London, Paine's appeals on behalf of underpaid civil servants caught the attention of Benjamin Franklin, who was there as an agent for several colonies. After meeting Paine, Franklin recommended him as an ingenious, worthy young man and sponsored his immigration to America. Once in Philadelphia, Paine began to write a pamphlet promoting the radical idea of American independence. Thomas Paine had suffered all his life under England's class system, and he spared no venom in his writing. In January of 1776, after virtually every typesetter in Philadelphia had refused to touch his treasonous work, a rebel printer finally agreed to publish it. Common Sense was its down-to-earth title. In its 47 pages, Paine attacked the notion that England's king should be seen as a parent to the American colonists. He set out to dethrone the sacred institution of monarchy.
When it came out, Common Sense sold 120,000 copies in the first 3 months, and over the course of several years it sold 500,000 copies. This was the equivalent, or almost the equivalent, of the Bible.
Common Sense was read aloud from street corners and pulpits, in taverns, parlors, and schools. The brilliant pamphlet was published anonymously. People speculated it had been written by Samuel Adams, John Adams, or even Benjamin Franklin.
Tom Paine was saying in this pamphlet what a lot of people were now thinking but had hardly dared to say out loud. In other words, that the colonies were at war with England.
So hopefully you got a sense from that video how important Tom Paine's position that he expressed in Common Sense was. And that also should help you focus on one of the intellectual origins of the Declaration of Independence. Now, by June of 1776, we have people who are members of the Second Continental Congress taking up the arguments of Tom Paine and really pushing for a complete separation from England, calling for a new nation, independent completely. Now, what as a result of this, the members of the Continental Congress took this proposal to a committee and asked that delegates from these regions come up with a proper draft, somehow that they could capture the images or the ideas of Tom Paine, the hostility that many people in the colonies were feeling towards England, and express that in a way that is much more clear and, I think, more decisive and divisive than the olive branch petition was. So, as a result of this, of course, we have what you all are very familiar with is the Declaration of Independence. Now, the next two videos, I'm going to just actually skip over fairly quickly. They're the ones that show up first here. They are interesting. Morgan Freeman talks a little bit about the background of the Declaration of Independence. Then you have a number of Hollywood people who read the actual language of the Declaration of Independence. And it's probably worth spending some time listening to on your own, but I'm not going to go into those in too much detail right now. So I'll just skip over those a little bit as we go here. So here's the Morgan Freeman one. And then on here to the one that has each section of the Declaration of Independence being read by various Hollywood individuals. So the Declaration of Independence, we spent some time talking about in class, and hopefully you have this sense of how radical this decree was. The signers of the Declaration of Independence uniting themselves in a common purpose, declaring themselves separate and independent from any rule in Great Britain. Obviously also putting their lives, their honor on the line, because they put their signature on this document that is, in the eyes of many of the British, of course, as being traitorous, and the loyalists would feel the same way as the British would, of course. So moving on from the Declaration of Independence, because we spent so much time talking about it in class, you've read the document, you've dissected it yourself. What I want to do is look at the next step, which is the efforts to try to build a new nation. So not long after the Declaration of Independence is proclaimed, the nation is faced with the task of trying to form some sort of central government. And this is where we see the Articles of Confederation coming into effect, which will be ratified relatively not long after. So what are the main points of the Articles of Confederation? As you remember from reading, hopefully, one of the key points was it was highly decentralized. So the government, the national government, did not have much power. Those powers, of course, were reserved back to the states. Additionally, the government, the central government, had very limited authority, and any of that authority came specifically from the states, not directly from the citizens of those states. That's an important feature because it gives you this idea of still maintaining some sort of hierarchy, not allowing your common citizen to have any type of direct representation or direct democracy, I guess in this case, in the new form of government. It did create a permanent Congress, and each of the states would receive one vote. We talked about in class how it didn't matter what size of the state that you were. Delaware gets the same number of votes as Pennsylvania. One of the other points here that's of importance is the national authority was really curtailed, circumscribed by the delegates. There was really no executive or judiciary. The main focus of the Articles of Confederation is on the legislative branch. And, of course, that creates an additional burden on the legislative branch. They had to do all the work of requisitioning an army, trying to coordinate with the states. So there's no presidency, there's no system of national courts as well. While this is happening, of course, the United States, what's becoming the United States, is trying to still fight a war against Great Britain. And the states were not willing to give the national government much authority to conduct the war. And so they became responsible for recruiting troops and outfitting them for battle. And it was really on a recommendation or a, provide what you can type basis. And so many states took it upon themselves to not be bothered with providing troops, providing resources, especially if the conflict was far enough away from them that they didn't feel a direct threat. With an interesting turn of events here, we have the Articles of Confederation, where a national government doesn't have much in the way of power, and so instead of trying to take more power, initially what we see happening are the state or the national government decentralizing itself even more, so putting more of the burden back on the states. Now, many of the states were willing to sacrifice for the war, but it was as long as they knew or were confident that the other states would do their fair share. There was a lot of free riding that was happening. Massachusetts, where so much of the conflict was happening within Boston, would maybe providing a disproportionate amount of the funding and the troops because of the conflict that's happening there, whereas maybe some of the other southern states were less concerned because it was so distant. It became fairly obvious to many people here that this decentralized government was not going to last for long. It would not be an effective way to continue to persecute the war against the great powers of England. And many states began to look at efforts to reform government, to try to do it in such a way to provide, as I put in quotes here, powers competent for the government. So these would be those things like taxation, legislation, executive branch, judicial branch, and partly because the war that's continuing during this time period. Now, as the war ends, and ultimately the British are defeated at one of the final battles here in Yorktown, the Continental Army is victorious. The British realize that this war is going to not end in their favor, and so they begin to sue for peace. As a result of that, the momentum for reform a national government was lost because the war is over, the national government has done its part, and now let's get back on to maintaining some sort of peace. So even though the victory goes to the colonists, there's really no more effort here for a national government. The next little bit here is about a 15-minute long video that I'm not going to show simply for the sake of saving some time. It's an interesting video. It's a high school teacher from New York who is using it to help prep his students for their end-of-year test, the Board of Regents test from New York. And so he's kind of a goofy guy, but he does have some good information, and it's probably worth watching on your own, especially giving some connection or some insight into the connections between the Articles of Confederation and the new Constitution. So it'll be here, and you would just need to click on that particular thing right there, and you can see he's got Ike and Tina Turner behind him, and like I said, it kind of gives a funny perspective on why the Articles of Confederation ultimately failed. So although there's no efforts to create a new government, there is a growing desire to have some sort of reform of the Articles of Confederation. And so by 1786, of course, the war is over during this time period, the state of Virginia makes the first move towards revising the Articles. And not all the other states were on board with this. Many of them felt that having a weak national government was actually a positive thing for them in the states. But Shays' Rebellion, of course, makes a big difference to many of these states when they see that there's a threat from within.